Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are thrilled to be here tonight celebrating Bird Uncaged. And we're here with Ruby-Beth Buitekant, who is a Charis Circle board member and so much more, and the author Marlon Peterson. So I'm going to introduce Ruby-Beth first. Ruby-Beth is a radical Southern lawyer, facilitator, and speaker. She is currently the Assistant Director of Movement Partnerships at the Movement Law Lab, an organization committed to building power in Black and Brown communities by incubating legal projects. They work to combine law and community organizing to protect, defend, and embolden justice movements. A lifelong activist, Ruby-Beth has worked as a consultant for organizations and workplaces tackling issues of racism and organizational development. During her time as a graduate fellow at the City University School of Law at CUNY, Ruby-Beth worked as a law clerk with Gideon's Promise at the DeKalb County Public Defenders and as an Ella Baker Fellow with the Center for Constitutional Rights. Before her legal education, Buitekant managed the Center for Court Innovation's anti-gun violence program, Youth Organizing to Save Our Streets, YO SOS, in Brooklyn, New York. She developed youth programming for young folks working to rid their communities of gun violence through peer education and training. She grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and loves calling the South home. So welcome, Ruby-Beth. We're thrilled to have you here. And we're thrilled that you, through your love and relationship with Marlon, made this event happen. So Marlon Peterson is the principal of Precedential Group, a social justice consulting firm. He is host of the Decarcerated podcast, a senior Atlantic Fellow for Racial Equity, a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, and a 2015 recipient of the Soros Justice Leader Fellowship. Ebony Magazine has named him one of America's 100 most influential and inspiring leaders in the Black community. His TED Talk, Am I Not Human? A Call for Criminal Justice Reform, has over 1.2 million views. He contributed to Kiese Layman's How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, and Akiva Solomon and Kenria Rankin's How We Fight White Supremacy. His writing has appeared in Ebony, The Nation, USA Today, Color Lines, and more. A graduate of New York University, he lives in Brooklyn and plays the steel pan during the summer. So welcome to you both, and welcome also to the Auburn Avenue Research Library. We have our incredible research librarian friend in the chat, dropping knowledge and additional sort of resources. So as we are engaging in this wonderful conversation, we encourage you to just know that you can go back and visit any of these resources that you see that intrigue you at the end. They will stay up, so you don't have to rush and click them all. You can stay with us in this conversation and scroll back up at the end. Click all those links. They'll just be up. You can revisit it as many times as you want. So thank you to Auburn Avenue. We are so grateful for this partnership and for all that you always bring to our community and to our city. The last thing I'll say is if at any time folks are watching at home, you want to ask a question, just click this Ask a Question box at the bottom center of your screen, and Ruby-Beth will be incorporating questions into the dialogue. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way, and thank you to you both so much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hey, thanks. RB.
Hi, friend.
How you doing? We back at it.
I know. I feel like it's 10 years ago all of a sudden. All right, so I wrote a little intro. You ready?
Yes.
How many times have you made that face at me? Okay. So I have to say, I'm really happy to be here, but if y'all couldn't tell, I kind of feel like I always knew I was going to be here. So I'm Ruby-Beth, and like ER said, I'm a proud member of the board of Charis Circle. So the programming that you see in this space that's brought on by Charis Circle, I'm very proud to put my stamp on that. I'm an Atlantan. I was a Brooklyn resident for a time, and I've known Marlon for over 10 years, and in all of those 10 years, I've been in awe of him. And I had a couple groundings I wanted to do. So one is that as we enter this space tonight, I'd like to lift up the feelings that we bring with us. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. Right before we went live, Marlon was just telling ER and me about witnessing a young person being arrested right in front of him on the street after a chase. We've lost a lot this year, and we're grappling with different ways that we tiptoe back into physical interactions with our friends and with strangers while still holding true all of the things that have happened for all of us individually and collectively this year. In addition to the feelings we're coming with, I want to lift up all the people that we're coming into this space with. Some of them are in prison. Some of them have died. Just this week, Atlanta suddenly lost Marissa McCall, who is an integral part of criminal legal reform here in Atlanta and a really fierce advocate for incarcerated people, especially in Georgia at the state capitol. So I was hoping we could start with a moment of silence for people who have died that you carry with you, and also for people who aren't free. And I'm going to use my moment to take a couple deep breaths, but feel free, everybody, to just use your moment however you would like. Thank you. So, Marlon and I used to run workshops together. We ran a youth organizing program in Brooklyn that focused on ending gun violence. I pulled out a couple of our old pins that I found. This one says, "Stop shooting, start living." And this tiny one with a ton of text on it, which was someone's graphic design idea, says, "Violence is like a disease. What are you doing to stop it from spreading?" And so since we used to run workshops, I wanted to start with a check-in, obviously. So my question, I know a couple people started shouting out where they're coming from in the chat, but if other people want to do that too, your name and pronouns and where you are, where you're coming from. And then my question was going to be, what is a food that feels like home to you? Right? So it doesn't have to be something that reminds you of home, because reminding of home isn't always welcome for everybody, but what's a food that feels like home to you? So if anybody would like to indulge and put their answers in the chat, I would appreciate it. And I will go first to model. My name is Ruby-Beth. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And a food that feels like home to me is, when I was little, my mom used to make sun tea. So literally putting tea bags in water in the sun, and that's how they would steep. So it steeps really slowly. It seems like very Southern to me. Raspberry sun tea. So that's a food that feels like home to me.
We are doing a check-in. Okay. So my name is Marlon Peterson. I'm he, him, his pronouns. I'm coming in from Brooklyn. And the food that feels like home for me, I would say French fries, but no, that doesn't feel like it. You understand why, is macaroni pie. And macaroni pie is, sure now we call it macaroni pie. It's macaroni and cheese. We just call it macaroni pie basically because you bake it in the oven and whatnot. That feels like home to me. It definitely feels like home to me.
I'll take it. I'm seeing salmon croquettes. I'm seeing fried fish, especially on Fridays, black-eyed peas and rice. Anything else that people want to add, feel free. We can't see you, but we feel you here, and letting us know what you're hungry for or what feels like home is one way to do that.
Wow, we got folks here from Ecuador.
So I have a lot of questions about your brilliant book, but I was hoping that maybe we could start with you reading us some from it.
Yeah, for sure. I had an idea of reading a different passage towards the end, but after speaking to you about what I had just seen not so long ago, I felt like going to a different passage. So I'm reading from chapter 2. Move on into chapter. And it starts off with a letter to me. Dear Marlo, when I think back to your childhood, you were real good at suicide. The schoolyard game played at PS 138, the elementary school a few yards away from where police killed Arthur Miller. A remix version of Flies Up, where one kid would bounce up handball high up against the wall, while a group of kids vied to catch the descending ball. Remember, if you drop the ball trying to catch it, you had to sprint to the same wall that it bounced off of and yell, "Suicide," when you touched it. If one of the other players picked up the drop ball before you got to the wall, they had the right to sling the ball at you like a Major League Baseball pitcher. Some guys would run up to you and sling the ball at your face, back of your neck, and ears. You all played that game in the heat of summer and in the icy winter. There were times that you were hit so hard with a half-frozen handball that you thought your face had split into uneven parts. Although you wanted to cry from the pain, sometimes you understood that crying in public was out of the question, an abomination, considered cowardly even for a 7 or 8-year-old. Fighting was a more honorable pain reliever. We yelled suicide to be safe from hurt. Despite the pain, you loved suicide, partly because you were always good at catching, but the real thrill came from hitting someone with the ball or the danger of being hit. Even back then, you were developing the ability to endure and inflict harm. Suicide was dangerous. There were black eyes, bloody noses, swollen temples, and busted lips. Remember that girl who got hit so hard she passed out? And she wasn't even playing. Someone misfired and thought nothing of it. You thought nothing of it. You kept playing. Maybe it was you who misfired and hit that girl. I wish you had been more attuned to the pain of black girls at the expense of your own fun or trauma or inclination to hide. I wish I was more attuned in my adult years. Life for us was similar to that game early called suicide. The slightest mistake usually resulted in the most severe pain. That hurt was before Biggie Smalls penned the articulable language, "do or die." Before then, most of us were just doing and trying not to die, but without the syntax. Just like the game of suicide, you could not choose where you would be hit. Just be ready to feel pain. Similarly, life did not give me the choice of consequences. I just had to be ready for the next bad thing to happen. This is a story that you will have to fight to. This is the feeling, This is the story that you will have to fight to not believe. These are the stories that I want to break free from. The stories I don't want to arrest you. Don't be paroled by these experiences. Create a liberation from a world that embeds within us our own overseer, slaver, jailer, parole officer, and undertaker. Try not to let your pain lead you. At some point, I want you to understand that everyone and everything that scars you was not your fault. Sixth grade was a tough year for me. Sixth grade was a successful school year for me. Back in 1990, IS 390 in Crown Heights was an infamous junior high school. It was across the street from Albany Houses, a 9-building high-rise residential experiment for poor Black and brown people. Elevators never worked, building maintenance budgets were not prioritized, and people were left to act like owners of a building where the landlord was the city of New York. This was the projects, and people there were taken care of like a project no one cared about. Like all geographies that surround housing projects, people did dumb shit, dumb, unloving shit. Cursed teachers out in school, organized themselves into gangs, robbed each other, shot each other. There were 2,605 murders and 112,380 reported robberies in New York City that year, the highest ever. A lot of unnecessarily dumb and harmful things were happening in 1990, and not just in New York City. Black unemployment was 3 times that of whites. Brooklyn had the highest number of HIV/AIDS cases in the city, and 50% of those were Black. 45% of Black women who headed households in the country were poor. The media, police, and politicians told us that crack was a Black drug, though crack cocaine was really a poor white drug, with over 65% of whites admitting they used to pipe up, compared to 26% of Blacks. That's not my stat. That's the United States Sentencing Commission report to Congress. Someone was brought into the narrative that white life was better. We shot, robbed, raped, and harmed our own communities in the ways we were conditioned to by media, police, and politicians as illegal aliens, crackheads, crack babies, lazy welfare queens, predators, and promiscuous STD carriers. But there were always reasons behind our so-called senseless violence, our monstrous acts. Who taught us that there was no sense behind our response Who taught us that there was no sense behind our responses to being treated senseless and unempathetically? Survival of the oppressed isn't always logical to the oppressor when observing the oppressed. None of our people are monsters. None. The moment we describe people as monsters, we shift human behavior into the realm of the unexplainable. Every act of violence can be explained, especially ghetto shit. Remember, running away from slavery was a crime and a diagnosis for mental illness. Senseless running away. Yet entire biographies get written when white boys and white women and white men shoot up concerts, churches, synagogues, schools, and protesters. White people made us believe that our pain was monstrous, senseless, and pathological. We have reasons. I'll leave off there, Aubrey.
Thank you. I was sharing earlier that I made the mistake of reading this book with a highlighter, and now most of my pages are highly lit.
It's all right. They're highly lit.
And that section about this concept of monsters was one that I just kind of kept circling over and over again. And you speak to it obviously beautifully, but also throughout the entire book. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was this refrain that you come to a lot, and even one of the chapters is named after it, of this idea of moving on. And that when you are surrounded by violence and all of the things that come with the stats that you were just reading, there is an inundation of violence and trauma just that becomes incredibly normalized. And so much of what you talked about was this idea of witnessing or experiencing violence in these really visceral moments at a very young age. And then the next sentence would be, moved on, kept moving, we moved on. And that refrain becomes, a poetic beat throughout the book that I found myself kind of, every time I would read it, it would still catch me off guard and kind of make me think about what it really means to move on in a situation like that. So one of the questions I want to kind of hear you talk about more is, what is the difference between moving on and healing? How do you think about that now? And what was the difference for you?
Yeah, I think, wow. I think about that in the realm of like what I just saw with the kid being chased by the police and being arrested and tackled by the cops. I think about what's different for me now is like I as an adult, and like I acknowledge, I'm aware that there are things that's happening to me at the moment that this thing happens, right? So seeing a kid get chased and then get tackled, and then seeing police run, like all that was happening on this day, as we remember in 1 year ago when George Floyd was killed. For me, like I acknowledge that there's triggers happening. Like there's triggers like this one. I know what it's like to be, chased and cuffed. I also know what it's like. I mean, we've seen the many images. I saw the kid on the side of the car, on the floor. Like I saw that just happen, and knowing that this imagery that we have as a human family, that we saw this happen, right, for so long on television. I think the difference for me is that I acknowledge that there are things happening. As I said, I think when I spoke about, or when I write about it, we move on. This bad thing happened, and then we just moved on. It, as you said, there's an inundation with these things that are happening all the time. There's not always time when you're 8, when you're 11, when you're 14 to stop and say, what does this mean at this moment?
Right.
But what I do know is happening is that all that information is being put in filing cabinets in our minds, particularly when you think about young people. When we work with kids, when we used to work with the teenagers, like all that information is being processed along with their regular teenage shit, right? All their stuff. And it's not until like they're in a moment where there's a reaction moment, oftentimes, when all those things kind of come out all at once, and they're like, where did all that come from, right? And I think it's important for us to sort of acknowledge that, when particularly, I think this is a very timely conversation that we had with RB, particularly the work that we did, that like, as we, we're hearing about all these things about upticks in violence and all these things we hear on the news. I don't know if everyone who is doing the reporting of it is taking the time to process that these young people, these kids, these younger folks, these young adults who are engaged in these things they are also impacted by all the trauma that our society is living through, whether it be the George Floyd, whether it be the pandemic that we acknowledged in the beginning. Like, they are all dealing with it too, and they're dealing with seeing their friend get shot or get locked up or whatever it is. And in so many ways, like I wanted to make people to realize this sensibility, there's things that are happening that make sense. It makes, in a very warped way, RB, it makes sense that people react in a harmful way. It's not right that they do it. We're not putting a judgment on it here. I'm saying it kind of makes sense if you have all these things being piled on each other and you're not even 15 yet. You know what I mean? You're not even 15 yet, right? And I'm thankful that most of us don't resort to these harmful behaviors and traits and whatnot. But it's just like, I wanted to acknowledge that we need to take time and acknowledge and process these things and give it the time it deserves to process.
So my question is, how do you do that? Right. So I'm with you. I hear you, and I read it in every chapter of the book, and I really was moved by you talking about that in the macro, and then also talking very specifically about what that process was like for you. And what do you attribute some of that to? Because there are many people who, after seeing your TED Talk and after hearing a little bit about your story, have been, shocked at your level of healing and your level of processing. So how did you get there? What are you still working on that helps you do that for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, and what has helped me get there? I talk about, like, I mean, honestly, people help me get here. I mean, that's why I would say people work. I use that, in terms of things that I do. I call it people work because, I mean, I believe in possibly people to do things, but I also know that people have helped me, right? And even if they didn't know it. And I think, like, over the years, I'm happy that a good part of my adult life has been about working with young people, right? Because I think working with young people over the years has helped me, like, in so many ways, I'm able to see me in them and understand, like, give myself some grace, right? In that, right? They're out of my body, and I give them grace, and I see to give myself a little grace too. I mean, I've had a lot that I've had to process, right? I want to say I've processed, that I am processing, right? I think writing this book, a lot of things came up that I had just not thought of. Like, it just, and it was hard for me. It was very difficult to go through this whole process of this book. But I mean, there's also therapy to talk about, like, real things that I've done. There's therapy, and I have friends that I also want to say this. I am open to talking to friends about what's happening to me. And that's a huge, for me, that's a difference, right? I talk to friends like, yo, this is happening, without fear of them thinking about me in a certain way. Because that's what friends are for. It may sound like a cliche. But yeah, those are some of the ways I've done it. And for me, I want to say this. I think for me, like, writing has been a big deal of it. I know I talk about it a lot, and sometimes it may sound, redundant at times, but for me to be able to see my experiences on paper, even if I don't write it, because I don't, I have books and journals that, obviously it's for me alone to see. But for me, when I see these experiences on paper, it gives me a little more, it helps me process it better, right? It helps me make sense of it in the totality of all the experiences that I have, Yeah, I mean, but it is a process, it's when you go through years of experiencing a lot of things, it takes a lot of, probably equate the same amount of time to sort of come through it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a work in progress. I'm doing the work, and you got to do the work. You got to be committed to doing it, though. I think particularly as adults, I mean, it's not easy, and the level of trauma and pain and residual trauma varies. But it's a commitment to being better. That you got to, just like you committed to, if you work out or you do whatever sort of routine, you meditate every day, whatever it is, that, like, you got to be committed to processing this stuff.
You don't meditate every day, do you?
No, I don't meditate every day. I would like to. I used to. No. It would be good, though.
I mean, of course, it would be great for all of us, but let's be real. Okay. Anyway,
That's what
so one of the things that you do bring up that you talked about that I imagine was really hard to see on paper and hard to write was about your various relationships with women and the ways in which those evolved over time. Obviously, you included stories about your mother, you include stories about your sister, you included a story about a woman whose name you couldn't remember, with whom you attempted a sexual encounter that wasn't consensual, and the relief that you felt when it didn't happen. And you also ask the reader as a person consuming this to not single out the worst parts of Black men from the worst parts of all men. That's a quote from the book. And I think for me, your ability to understand racism in the context of gender is something that I really loved about the book. And I wonder, what is your relationship with gender and coming to terms with your relationships with women have to do with healing? How does that integrate into your healing process?
RB, you are definitely my friend. Yeah. There's parts when I speak about, the various, encounters I had with women in the book as a kid and as an adult as well. I had struggled with like how I knew I had to write about it, right? This one thing I knew I could not avoid it, not because no one knew, because nobody knew, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Nobody would know outside of my circle, but because I knew I couldn't get better personally unless I was able to acknowledge the parts of me that's ugly and hideous. And you know what I mean? And that was me. That's my word. That's how I decided to do it, right? And when it comes to my relationship with gender and with women, I think I walk this fine line where what I'm thankful of is that I can relate to many different types of people and where they come from and where their entry point is, right? The dude on the street that say all the filthy things about women, and still I can have a conversation with them in a way that makes sense, and I can have a conversation with somebody on the other, end of the spectrum. And I think me being able to hold that balance is I'm gonna say this. I don't know how this comes out, but that's where I make use for what it's worth, the worst parts of myself, because I understand where certain people are at this moment, and I know that they can progress up to another place, right, on their pace and time. But it's in personal ways. I realized through this whole process also that there was a particular mistrust, I say, in terms of my relationship with women in my life, and it's based on things that are deeper than I didn't go into in this book. I think it's something I need to keep for certain people, but there's this elevator that I'm on in terms of I'm moving up the stairs, and part of what every floor on the elevator is being truthful, and that's for me being truthful about it, because I was good at hiding shit, right? And I don't want to say I was the worst nigga out in the street. I'm not saying all that either, but why would I want to compare myself to that also, right? Yeah. But what I'm saying? I just think that my relationship has gotten better as I've gotten better with myself, because I think that part of it is what we do as men, particularly because the way gender is so dichotomized in all these various ways, that we're we're going to treat women a certain way and we're going to treat our bros a certain way. And some ways that fucked up way kind of makes it sometimes things like manners and chivalry and shit, all that sort of stuff. And there's an evolution out of that we need to do too. But I think that way that we dichotomize in so many ways, we would often say that we give more grace and respect and love even to men and to other men, and don't think that they other women, we don't need to do that. And any way that's out of some sort of romantic or carnal way, we don't need to do it that way. Because that same sort of love and respect for each other. And it takes time to realize that, because it's so common to be the other way. It's, at least in my upbringing, my circle, my surroundings, it's so common to be the way that's harmful to each other. You know, I'm gonna end up on this though, that like when I spoke about the sexual encounter that almost happened, thankfully didn't happen, or attempted sexual encounter, you know, I think I speak about it in the realm of like just had nothing to do with her.
Yeah.
It had absolutely like just had nothing to do with her. And what I mean is that it was all about us as guys, me as a boy at the time, 17, 18, as a boy wanting to sort of prove something to my boys, to my other friends, my other guys, when they didn't say anything to me to prove it. In my mind, I had to, and this person just happened to be an object. And that's fucked up, obviously. You know what I mean? And I know it's triggering for many. But I was like, it's the truth of it. And I don't think a lot of us guys still, I don't think most of us, I don't think we know we do it. We realize what we're doing. I don't even think people like me where I'm at. I think the thing about it is like, I haven't arrived. I don't want like people to watch like I've arrived. You know what I mean? Right? I'm definitely much better. I'm not the 17-year-old kid I was. I'm not in that mind frame anymore. Obviously, I be mature, I grow up. But the biggest thing is this, RB, is that truthful to self, truthful to myself, right? Because my interaction with anybody doesn't matter if I'm not being who I am, who I need to be, who I know, who I could be. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that requires introspection and digging and yeah, it requires a lot of digging and deep and being honest with self. And, you know, that's why I put it in the book, you know. I didn't want to avoid it, even though I could have.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also what you're saying is it's resonating so much, and it's resonating with other folks in the chat too. I'm seeing some responses, but I'm also just, it's just another reason that when we're presented with thinking about gender differently than how a lot of us did growing up, and we understand gender identity and things on a spectrum, it liberates all of us, right? Yeah. There's so much there that can allow us to be real about who we actually are and what roles we want to play in our communities and how we want to be seen and how we are comfortable being seen, as opposed to what we really, really expect that other people are expecting of us. And that really came through for me in the book too, around like this being part of that journey for you in terms of figuring out, what does gender even mean to you? You know, how do you even grapple with these much bigger questions of identity that come up over and over again in the book? And knowing you as well as I do, one aspect of the book that surprised me, especially as a through line, was how much you talked about your relationship with growing up Jehovah's Witness and how it shaped your world. And it changed a lot throughout the book, and really powerfully, I think it persisted as a lens and a guide and a way to connect people. It also became a way that you made friends when you were incarcerated. Like, it was so many different kind of webs of how it permeated all throughout your life. And I found myself at the end wanting more around that, and curious how you think about your religion and your spirituality now, and, you know, which aspects of it from your childhood do you still find yourself maybe gravitating towards, even, you know, not necessarily in practice, but like as a tool. Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Well, just before, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I am not a practicing Jehovah's Witness or anything of that sort. I haven't been probably since 2008, 7, somewhere around there, before I came home. But I want to say this, though. I got baptized as a Jehovah's Witness in prison, right? In 2003, I believe it was. And there's a whole back and forth about, one time I was supposed to do it, and then I said I don't want to do it anymore, and then I ended up doing it. The point, though, part of baptism is kind of going in. The realm of that is, it's just like, it's like a public display of your dedication to God, right? And I remember in so many ways, like my dedication was something along the lines of, I always want to be able to be of use to other people, right? And at that time, though, it was then in the religious sense, right? Right. And as I moved on, and I just moved on from that in a healthy way, right? I moved on from the religious, affiliation in a healthy way. Like that dedication to like who I want to be is like, I always want to be of use to folks, right? And I think it's definitely not in a religious space anymore. Like I haven't, I don't attend church, synagogue, mosque, any of those sort of things, right? I don't even meditate every day. but there are things about connecting to people that I think I always hold true to that. I mean, part of what that religion did or taught young people to do, if you know, people knocking on your door, right? That's organized. I mean, they might have been trying to but they're 2 by 2 organizing, talking to people who you don't know, right? And like that works as I've gotten older, obviously, and I was organizing and doing community work. Like, yeah, speaking to people you don't know, but you're trying to build a relationship with them because you have some information that might help them, might not. You want to share it. So, I mean, I hold true to that in that sense. I mean, I never disrespect religion or anything like that. I mean, I don't engage with it for my own reasons, but there was community that was built out of that inside.
Yeah.
And I think, I value community a lot, and I value the community. They gave me, there was friendship. There was friendship inside there, people I could play, work out with and talk to and,
Yeah. That reminds me, I have a memory from when we were running YoSOS together. And one of the projects that we did with the young people in our program was they would decorate the store windows for the holidays of the block that we were on, the block where we would meet every week or every day, whatever, constantly. Whenever they wanted to come by. But there was a project where they would have to go in physically themselves, go into the stores to talk to whoever was in charge about permission to decorate the windows. And I remember it was the first project usually we would do with them because we'd get them kind of in the fall and it would be in the lead up to the winter. And it would be the first time that they would do a project like this. And I remember one time we were in a debrief about how it had gone one day. They're coming back with their little clipboards and they're like, this person was really nice and this person was really mean and all that stuff. And you asked a question that has resonated with me ever since, which was, how did you feel walking into a store with no intention of buying something? And every single one of the participants said it was so weird. I have never interacted with somebody in that type of position. As a teenager, I've never interacted with somebody in a different type of way that wasn't transactional, who was obviously working in a retail experience. And it was their first introduction to organizing. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? It's that push to just go knock on that door and talk to somebody and start with building those skill sets. And I remember thinking it was such a poignant question that I never would have thought of. How did it feel to go into a store and not buy something? But it was also, it was simultaneously this thing of you're becoming an organizer now. You are so powerful in your neighborhood and in your community in ways that, we're only beginning to uncover as young people, but also it was also anti-capitalist, it was this way of saying you are allowed to interact with people in ways that do not involve transactions and don't have to do with currency. And that is your right. You are a person. You get to interact with people however you want, and being able to do something for them or ask them. And that has stuck with me so much. I think about it a lot, even when I just go into we don't have bodegas in Atlanta, but when I was in New York and I would go into a bodega, but it really speaks to it. And you talk in the book about the kind of conflation of capitalism and America and all of these, things that we have so ingrained as normal that you're pushing back a lot in the book and saying, this is not how I want to be. This is not normal.
Yeah. I think, I knew this much about even writing this process in this book. It was that, and we've seen it in the work that we've done, that you see what happens on a community level, on a street level. Oftentimes, particularly in America, because there's so many, there's 300 and some odd million people in this country, right? Or in a city like New York, where there's 8 million people in the city. We don't always pay attention to how things, something as big as capitalism. What do you mean by capitalism? How something as big and as normal and ingrained in us is impacting that little girl, that little person in our community, right? We don't always draw those connections. So when they do something that seems out of whack, we think is out of whack, it's you draw the line. There's a direct line going here. And that's why for me, I had to go from this was happening on Notion Avenue and Pacific Street, but this also was happening in the government, right? Yeah. We got to be able to draw those connections because we are not acting in a vacuum. Black and brown people are not acting out in a vacuum. We're harming each other, but we are not harming each other in a black and brown vacuum here. And the systems that be, whether it be the system of police and the system of certain social services, whether it be the foster care system, whether it be, the financial system, like these things are hurting people, and we think that it's just supposed to just keep going, and that like there's not like we're like super people. We're not supposed to be impacted by it.
Yeah, right. We're just supposed to move on.
Supposed to move on. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about a little bit around the Young Scholars Program. So during your time inside, during your period of incarceration, you received the first letter from Nadia Lopez, which turned into this transformative project that you credit with motivation, with love, and with a desire for future work, especially with young people. And in that letter, she wrote to you, she was talking about her students, her young students. Was it middle school?
Yeah.
Middle school age students initially. So she said, quote, my kids have a false perception of life. And I had to take a pause after reading that line. She goes on to say, they think jail is only associated with the worst of the worst. And she found herself, in her position teaching, having known you as a young person when she was also a young person, and then trying to reconnect with you when you were in prison, she found herself telling her students about you. How did that feel to hear that? What was that like? And how did their understanding of who is in prisons and jails change over time after you started communicating with them?
I definitely felt unworthy. I couldn't get like why would she want to talk about me at that time, right? I felt like are there other adults outside that you can help, support these young folks? Why me? Like, where I'm at, what I'm here for.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel worthy about it. But even in that line though, that point that she wrote about, like how young people associated jail and prison with the worst of the worst. I think that, I don't know if she knew it at the time, maybe she did, but like just like mass incarceration. That's why you put mass incarceration, right? I think we just think about mass meaning like just a lot of people. Yes, obviously it's a synonym for that, but it means that like anybody can get caught up in this, right? And like anybody in these communities, in our communities, particularly our communities where they're overly policed, can get caught up in this system. And getting caught up in the system doesn't mean that you were innocent, right? I think people always think like you're getting caught up because you mean innocently getting caught up. No, I mean, people do things too. I'm not saying that people aren't doing things. I'm saying like the conditions in these communities, and she was talking about at the time was Fort Greene Project side.
Yeah.
Like in these conditions in these communities, yeah, you don't got to be like, we have the worst, quote unquote, whatever that means, the worst of the worst. Once upon a time, you might have had in a neighborhood the one guy that somebody knew about that went, like, it was this one person. Everybody was like, oh, that person, right? It's not like that. It's anybody, and I think that's what she was trying to get through to, like, in so many ways, it's sort of like sad even that, because these kids were middle school age, 11, 12, 13, that even at that age, they were having conversations, as they should, particularly in this era, but that issues of incarceration were issues that impacted them.
Right.
I don't think that's part of it. Like, we should be speaking out because we should be, but what I'm saying is like that doesn't happen in all communities where we got to talk about how real or how proximity to incarceration is a real thing, and that's sort of sad. But in so many ways, I mean, that when I talk to you about how young people help me out, like first of all, writing to those young people, but them seeing value in me, like they ask me stuff. I'm like, you don't know me. Why you asking me? Why you telling me about your business? Right? And for me, that they were building a community with me. These little kids in relationships with me.
Right. And I'm seeing in the chat saying a comment saying people who have done harm need care and transformative justice. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about the subtitle for your book, An Abolitionist's Freedom Song. So why is that the subtitle for your book? What does abolition mean in this context? And then I also have some follow-up questions about what does song and what does music mean in this context?
Yeah, you know, this title of the book, the latter half of the title didn't come until after I wrote the book, right? I didn't come into the book saying I'm writing a book about abolition. You don't hear about abolition until, you don't see the word abolition in the book until, I don't know, last 10 pages or so, something like that, right? And me and somebody who was always, you know, studied up on it, curious about it, my politics leaned that way somewhat. But I think through the process of this book, I realized that like what abolition is asking for, there's some real tangible things, right? There is an end of policing. There is an end of prison system. Like there is an end of the prison industrial complex. Those are real things that we are asking for too. And alongside that, the thing that we're talking about is that getting to the root of why these things are happening in our communities in the first place. And why these things are happening to us as individuals in the first place. Why are we reacting the way that we are to things, right? So that's for me in the book. Like I said, I had to be truthful. Like for me, I was like, I gotta do this. I gotta figure this out, right? I got, you know, for me, and in so many ways, the title became a discovery in a sense throughout this book, right? I didn't come into this book saying I'm writing a book about abolition. It just came to like, this is where we need to go, because in so many ways, like all the system that we interact with, the way we interact with each other, the way we love and don't love each other, right? Like these things play into they play a role in the larger thing, right? And that's why even in the book, I go like towards the end, I go to America. Like I criticize America too.
Right.
Because this abolitionist project is also about the abolition of what we believe is like the sanctity of the American Republic. Like there's a thing about that needs to be uprooted, right? Because there's a belief in it that it's false and deceptive and harming people to this very moment, you know? And I think, you know, listen, just like one of the reasons why I left religion is because religion has in it, like once I believe in my thing, that means your thing is wrong, right? You may not say it, but by default, I'm praying to this person, you're praying to that person. And that ended up not rubbing well with me. Abolition to me is not like, to me, and somebody, you know, Janice in the chat speaks about transformative justice. Abolition is another politic that we haven't interrogated enough, that we haven't tried to practice. I won't even say enough. We haven't tried to practice it.
Right.
It's worth the next generation to try to, and it's worth our ancestors. You think about somebody like a George Floyd, he's our ancestor now. It's worth his legacy to try something different.
Right.
It's worth his legacy to not say only, well, we need to get better at police doing this sort of stuff. Maybe we need to figure out how we don't have them entering here in the first place, you know?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I want you to tell us a little bit about the music that inspired this book. And you talk in the book about how while it was your father who actually used to play steel pan, it was your mommy who was the cultural ambassador because of her pride in Trinidad and Tobago, and her love of calypso and steel pan music, and her ability to have fun, which I just so appreciated that as a trait to kind of honor in someone, especially I think it's something that those of us who swim around in social justice spaces could use a lot more of. So I really appreciated that. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the music that inspired the book, but then also how you feel when you play steel pan.
Oh man. Well, the music, I actually have like I wish I would put together a playlist of all the songs, but this song is hugely inspired by Kendrick Lamar. I mean, this song, look at that. This book is hugely inspired by Kendrick Lamar. Really one song in particular in the song is Sing About Me. But then there's other folks who like I would get into to like help me get through this process. I should also say that I can't write unless I'm listening to music. It's a thing I have, right? But for this book, there were certain songs and certain people who I look to like help me get me going. And just the mood of them, Jay, Alicia, Jill Scott, Lauryn Hill was huge in this, right? And me getting through this book. And then some more obscure, the only time I know all the soca artists, I'm going to throw them out, Shadow, Kitchener, Marsha Montano. Like, some of these people played a huge role in me in the rhythm of the book, right? And so I didn't know, people have said it's like lyrical and it's poetic. I did not, like, I was just writing. I wasn't trying to write stanzas, right, necessarily, but I guess it came out that way. And then with the steel pan, excuse me, my father played in Trinidad, my older sister played here, my older brother played here, Devon played when he was younger, my nephew. I just found out my mother's brother also played too back in the day. I just found it out recently. For me, it's a place where I can get lost in a good way, right? Because, the way we play, it's a band, it's not just me. I'm not a soloist or anything like that. Band up to 100 people in it, right? And people are doing all their things. People are doing whatever they do. And it's, but like, it's just a place I can go in it and I can close my eyes. I'll say I close my eyes, I'll have one Heineken. I can have one Heineken the whole night. I don't need to keep drinking. Just one Heineken can hold me down. And I could just be in the rhythm of the music of it. And it just takes me someplace. And I never consider myself interested in, like, I've never considered myself a musician because I'm not like, I don't even read music. I don't read music. I just play by ear for what it's worth. But it's one of the safest places for me. And I think I knew that young. I first started playing when I was about 15 or 16 in the summer. And it was, on my block, my block, St. Mark, there's a lot going on. But during the summer, it would take me away from the block because it was on the other side of Brooklyn. And I would love it. It would take me away.
Yeah.
Even as a kid, I was stressed out, like whatever problems I was having as a kid, right? And I could go to the companion yard and be good. And even as an adult now, I should also say this last thing before I know the time running, but like even inside, when we had our Walkman, when I was still in like Manhattan House, Queens House, Rikers Island, where we still had the city frequency, there were certain stations that will play Steel Pan during Labor Day time. And I swear it was like, I felt like I literally cried in myself listening to that because it meant something to me, it really meant something to my soul.
We actually do have a little more time. We have till 9.
Okay, all right, okay.
I got questions, so.
I got questions.
When I was chatting with you, one of the things you said that you wished more people would ask you about, you've been on the virtual book tour circuit for a while now. This is, I imagine the fatigue is real, and I appreciate you doing it with me again, yet another one. But one of the things you said you wished people would ask you about more was about the support you got from beloved friends during this writing process. And you specifically said Darnell and Kiese. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of give us a little bit of, give us your intro to those two folks and what their support has meant to you.
Well, I mean, Kiese Lehman, first of all, I met him the same day you met him. Oh, actually, no, the same day Nadia Lopez met him. I'm sorry, I'm getting my dates confused. But I met him through kids, bringing young people from Brownsville to Vassar College and students up there connecting me to him. And I remember when we met, one of the first, he had said to me, "Yo, Mom, I'm a fan of your work." I was like, I'm only been home from prison 6 months. What I do, right? I forgot that I had a blog that I had somebody that would transcribe stuff and my writings from inside. But I didn't have any value on that. I just thought I was putting some stuff out into the world. Didn't know that anybody outside was reading it. But like that soon became a friendship. And then a couple of years later, he introduced me to Darnell and Michael Denzel Smith. But Darnell, through this process, and Kiese, while they are busy, they have busy lives, and they had their own books and book tours, and they're teaching, and they're doing all the things, right? And family, taking care of family, their own families, and growing and healing too. Like they would call me. It's one thing to text somebody, and they would do that too. But it was another thing that, like, they would just call me, particularly Darnell would just call me and be like, "How you feeling?" And it's not like we spoke every day. We didn't talk every day, but he would just call me and like, how you doing? And then they were like, so how that writing going? You know, kind of like, you know, in some way accountability partner, but they weren't calling me just like to check on to see when I was writing, kind of like how I was feeling. And I think because I know why, because they understood what the process of writing a memoir is like. And I guess they were doing to me what people did for them, or what they wish folks did for them, or what have you. And then also, I think, you know, you remember when we hooked up, when we organized that fundraiser at the bookstore, the Black bookstore here in Bed-Stuy, some years ago, and you don't want to create the flyer for it. I remember that. When we organized that though, and I mean, we had this sort of silent bond that we would all write books. It wasn't like a bed or anything like that, but we spoke about it. You know, Darnell writes a lot about Black men loving each other, loving Black men. Right? He writes a lot about that. And I think like being in proximity to him and Key, like there's a way, I mean, I have friends, Terrell, and, you know, I have other friends too. I don't want to knock them out of the box, but like, there's a way in which they curated like a circle of Black men, of us loving each other.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, in a way that was unique, right? And the fact that we didn't know, like most of my friends I've known for a decade, I've known for years, right? I've only known them for, you know, a short period of time. Well, the same amount of time I've known you almost. And I just really love them. Like, you don't understand like how much they've like took care of me in Kiesse's in Mississippi, and Darnell is wherever the hell he is right now in California, you know, but we took care of each other, but they took care of me through this process. And they helped me realize I could do this, right? You know, like I had the idea of writing a book one day, but it was kind of like this, you know, one day I want to go to this far off country, right? And it was kind of like this thing. And they kind of helped me realize that you're good at writing, bro. Like you can do this. You're good at this. You know, you're really kind of good at this, you know. Anyway, I love them and I support them, and I wanted to just sort of always lift up people.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I was one of my very close friends who's on right now, who is in Ecuador. She and I were talking about the book and our reactions to it. And one of the things that kind of kept coming up in our conversation was this idea of you actually do in the book what you're asking the readers to do, which is to say that, you know, the difference between saying it takes a village, like what community is important. Instead of that, you're listing names and you're honoring the specific instances of community that got you to where you are, and all of the people that brought you to the moment, but seamlessly in the narrative of talking about your life and the memoir of what has happened, and doing it as a practice and as an example to show us the ways that it can be done. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to with Kiese and Darnell, of like, it's one thing to write about these concepts and the cycles that we need to break and the things that we're capable of doing for each other. It's quite another to pick up the phone and actually just do it on a day. And the word that I kept coming to was that there's something very kind about the work, about the book, that it's an allowance of showing community in public. And it's also very kind of you to share the hardest parts of your stories. You didn't have to, like you were saying, it wasn't, no one was holding your feet to the fire. It wasn't about that. It was an act of service. And so since my friend and I were kind of talking about it, and she's a writer and was wondering what was your favorite part of the writing process. So you talked about how hard it was, but what was your favorite part?
It's two parts. I think two of my favorite parts is when I write about Dev, and the other part is the absolute end of the book. I want to say, I mean, you know that, but you know my relationship with him, and writing about him, it felt good to write about him in that way, right? the way I always speak about him. But just kind of moving forward into the end of the book. I don't know if I said this to anybody. I wrote the end of the book in the middle of a festival in Ghana with music playing. Right, it was Afrochella. I went there. It was a huge music festival. People all over the place. It's hot as hell and dancing and drinking and all this. People having a good time, festive. And I sat down in a corner with my phone and I just sort of like wrote it out. And I wrote out, if you see some of the descriptions in it, I talk about kente cloth and all that stuff. Like it's literally there. But the reason, because it felt good. And I should also say, like, the reason why I went to Ghana at that time was actually because it was 10 years to the day that I had come home. For me, just a personal, talking about spirituality, just personally, I wanted to do something that would kind of like wash away a lot of the muck that I was still holding in a way. And going to Ghana and seeing the Cape Coast Castle and all those sort of things, to me, those were spiritual experiences. And so I was in that mindset when I wrote the end of the book, and I was in a good place. I was like in this, it's weird, right? Like I was in this like sun is rising place, this in my personal life, right? Because I was also I was also like dealing with a deep personal, like going through depression at the moment, like in a really serious way, right? And in that moment, it just felt so good, and it felt like what freedom felt like, and so I mean that was the end of it was good for me. Obviously, the revision of it took some time, but I smiled when I wrote the end of the book, right? I actually have but I have facial expressions and whatever, and I remember like I was smiling when I was writing that end of the book, and so that was fun for me, and because also I want to say this last thing is that I didn't write this book in a way of, all right, let me read the previous chapter. What did I write in the previous chapter? I mean, some of it you can see is connected, but like that's really in the editing process. But I didn't write, all right, I wrote this in chapter 6. All right, now chapter 7, we're going to do this, and now chapter 8. It wasn't necessarily, there's chronology in the book, but it wasn't necessarily like that in my process. It was like just how I felt it and where I needed to go, where my body was taking me. And the end of the book is where my body took me to that place. Like I let this out. I let it out. I gave it. I put it all there. And in so many ways, like you said, like for me, that was what the healing process looks like. I got to acknowledge the people that were my support system, right? So for me, that's important. And somebody else is on this is Janice Rochevelle, right? But I got to acknowledge her, like people who were in that space who were like, who didn't know what they were doing. They ain't know. I ain't come to them like, can you please help me, right? They just were there. And I think that's another thing about community. You're just there, and people will pull from you what their soul needs.
I can picture you smiling and writing, and I have to say, it took a long time to be able to picture you smiling in photos. And are you comfortable talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm better at it. But I don't know. I didn't used to feel like if I wasn't feeling good inside, well, I'm gonna act like it. I remember having a real conversation with a buddy of mine some years ago when we were talking about, because he was also somebody like I don't smile. We were talking. He was like, yeah, wow. Like if I don't feel like it inside, I don't know how to fake it. I mean, when I'm talking, I'm joking. We laugh. That's it. But like, when pictures up or whatever it is, smile. It wasn't a thing. And there was a lot of, I want to talk about the negative of it. For me, where I'm at now, or why I'm a lot more comfortable smiling. One, I think I'm handsome. And but let me say that though, a joke, but like that is, if you read the book too, like that's not something I was always able to just say. And I'm not saying that like, braggadociously or anything like that. But there is something about being happy with, like being comfortable with who I am, right? And in my own skin. And it just feels good. And I also know that that like, for me, smiling, because I know that I know what it's like to live out parts of my best parts of myself. Like I know it, like even through all the darkness and all the stuff, like there was also great, wonderful things happening in those moments too. And I honor those. So now, I mean, like, why not? And also, I always say this, one of the people who had dropped a jewel on me when I was going through a deep level of depression is another writer, Brittany Cooper, and we were at this this brunch thing here some years ago, Black brunch that we would hold, and I was like, oh man, I did not want to go to this, but Darnell called me, like, Jamal, you got to come out. I was like, so I was like, let me,
Why didn't you want to go?
I didn't want to be around people. I didn't like being around people. I would rather just be in my apartment, and I didn't want to be around people. I mean, that's also what depression looks like. And, I came out and reluctantly, and I remember having a conversation. I don't know how it came up with Brittany, but I remember her saying something to me, Marlon, you've been through so much worse. You can get through this. And I don't even know what we were talking about. I don't feel like we were having just some deep ass conversation, but she just said it to me and kind of like went on to her next conversation. And, and it was kind of like, yeah. And I got a reason to smile for that.
You have a great smile.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I want to ask, I'm like checking my notes. I want to ask a little bit more about your writing style, because it is lyrical and it is unique, and it does, you can read throughout the course of the book you've included letters and you've included writing from when you were younger, and even talked about really passionately about things that you talked about and cared about when you were younger that you don't actually agree with anymore. And so it brought up this concept for me of like living in revision. And so much of your time inside is encapsulated by that. There's so much revision. There's so much editing of how do I think about myself? How do I think about these people? What do I do when someone is asking me to speak to young people? How do I like shift my understanding of myself as somebody who could even do that? And since, you've been out and you've been home, you've been just constantly pushing and trying new things. And, the program that we did together did not exist before we started it. And we did not know what we were doing,
we didn't know.
So I want to kind of ask about that, just about this concept of revision. But I'm also very specifically curious if you think that your time in prison contributed to your writing style, and if so, how? And how does revision kind of work while you're just constantly revising yourself?
Wow. I could say I'm gonna answer part about prison, that experience contribute to my writing style. It definitely contribute to me, how I write with music, right? So inside I would put headphones on to black out all the stuff that was happening. And so my little Walkman that we had, and that became my thing. Like I would sit down in my my cell or whatever, and I'll put my headphones on, put on my music, and I can be where I need to be. And I developed my a rhythm, because when I write, I also kind of like bop my head. Like for me, it's like just a whole rhythm. I dance to it, and so I still do that. So I want to say that like in a real way, like that habit was formed in prison. I think in terms of the revision part, there's the ways I saw incarceration, the way I saw people who were incarcerated before I went to jail is completely different to how I saw people who were in prison when I was in jail, and how I definitely by the time I left, right? I had many of the biases that most people have, and prejudices and all that sort of stuff, and misinformation about people inside. And then I caught myself in there, and I saw all these people, and I was like, wow, you got to adjust how you think about these people in a certain way. You think about these people in a certain way. Why are you thinking this way about them? Right? You're much different from him. You might not have had all the stuff happen like that person, but you're not much different, And so in so many ways, just the way I saw the world was like a real-time revision. The way I saw white people was a revision, to be straight up. Like I just saw, before prison, the only time I knew white people were like cops, and teachers, and not as people. In some way, I was always kind of curious about white people in a way of like why they the way they are like this, but there was still this nudge of like they probably a little bit better than like I just growing up in a certain way and seeing them in a certain light. I think that the way I saw white people change, my ability to speak to truthfully to white people changed, right? But also I just want to think like, could we talk about the process of writing? But the process of writing is also a process of living, right? And so like the way I've been able to, through writing a revision in a sense, is really like how I just sort of see in my life. Like I thought black men were the center of the universe. Like why we gotta think about this, right? I would have went gung ho arguing, debating somebody about that 20 years ago, 15 years ago, what have you. And I had to be like, oh wait, no, nah, bro, like no, it ain't that way. So now to the point with this book, or even not just the book, just in writing now, I think, as I said, revision is not only about, the pen is about our lives. And we got to be aware that there are things that we believe, we got to be okay about sometimes hating the things that we used to love, right? That's something we got to figure out how to be okay with that. Sometimes loving the things we used to hate, right? We got to be okay with that because that's a part of being like a human. You got to evolve. I don't care how much book sense I got or whatever it is. If we're not revising our lives in real time, we're in so many ways contributing to the stagnation of society.
You refer in the book to a few different names that you have gone by or been called over your life. And as you know, I am 6 months pregnant today. And I'm wondering what you would like to be called by this new fresh human. And I think I've been toying a lot with the way that, young people get to see the adults in their lives. And so I'm curious what you would like to be called. And I'm also curious what you would like this person to know about you.
Uncle Marlo. Uncle Marlo.
Done.
Uncle Marlo. And what I want this person to know about me. It's gonna sound that their mother help that their mother also is part of my revision. I put on Facebook, on Instagram, I think, talking about this event and how we first met. And I always remember that I'm gonna say what I feel. You know what I mean? And I can't remember what it was, but I remember asking you a thing in the interview. And I was trying to throw this question or throwing this statement without different people seeing like, let me see what they're gonna say. Cause are they gonna just try to, get in to fit in, you know what I mean? And I can't remember what it was, but you were like, da 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 da, and that's just how I see it. That's and I was like, that's right, I like that. But that kept going throughout our time working with each other, right? Like you would like you helped grow me. And the time I was very vulnerable, fragile about managing somebody, like, oh my God, I've only been home how many long I'm managing somebody? I was like, shit, I don't know if I'm doing this right? And I don't think that we ended up managing. I don't think that lasted long. But I do think that there was ways in which I could be honest, ways in which I saw gender at the time, that whether it be through you just pulling me to the side, you know what I mean? Or just like your community of friends that you went to school with and all that, being around your friends and whatnot, your circle, that helped grow me in ways that I didn't see, that I didn't expect. I just thought I had to run a youth program. You know what I mean? And that is what we did, but there was so much more to it. So I want that young person, that baby right now that's pre-6 months old, is that what you call it? Pre-6 months old, to call me Uncle Marlo, and to know that their mother helped me with revision. Yes, they would love us talking about revision, by the way. Just he would love it, the fact that we talk using that word.
Well, I can say with a lot of confidence that you are an excellent manager, excellent supervisor. And I think one of the things that I have always admired about you is how naturally you come by a lot of your gifts. So, you know, you are a writer and you are a leader. And even when it comes to something as seemingly mundane as nonprofit management, you're also that. And I am so thankful that that is reflected in the book. So many of your gifts, and they come through in obviously the stories that you tell and the ways that you grapple with trauma and the ways that you grapple with the things that you have experienced, but also with the book itself, which feels like an appropriate transition to maybe welcome ER back to discuss how folks can get their hands on the book. But I am interested in, I want to be sure if there are questions that other folks have. I got to ask all of mine, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Folks can click the ask a question, though I'm not remembering how to check it.
I think you did such a thorough and amazing job that you pushed all the questions out of people's minds, which is excellent. So this was such a beautiful conversation, and I'm just really grateful to both of you for modeling so many of the values that we talk about so much at Charis, and particularly about that people aren't disposable, and that it's so important to remember that we are all growing and revising all the time, and that's so much of how ultimately we are going to get free, is that we continue to sort of walk alongside each other and keep, you know, investing in our collective growth. So I remembered that tonight listening to both of you. So thank you. And thanks to everyone who watched tonight. I want to make sure that you know that you can click this teal button at the bottom of the screen to buy Bird Uncaged and Abolitionist'S Freedom Song from Charis. It really does help us when you buy the books directly from us. So thank you for doing that. Also, Charis Circle is a nonprofit, and so it does help us when you make a donation of any size to support our work. We are also very grateful for that, and grateful to our friends at Auburn Avenue Research Library for all of the amazing resources they have dropped. So you got the call numbers there, you got everything you need. You just go over, hit up the library, get those books. Some of those are also available from Charis, but we always want you to access and utilize the library as much as possible, and let folks know about these resources that are for free in our community, and anybody can use them. So please get down on those as well. And I think the last thing I will say is I'm going to be adding captions to this and putting it up on our YouTube channel. So if there's anybody who missed this tonight or who would benefit from watching it with captions, please let them know that it will be available probably within 36 hours up on our YouTube, and we'll tweet that out. So Ruby-Beth, as always, you are an excellent interviewer and moderator. Marlon, this was an incredible gift to have you here. Thank you both. I hope you both stay safe and well. And Marlon, I hope we get to have you come by for a visit sometime in person.
Yes, we've been scheming that up for a lot of years. We got to make something big happen. Thank you so much, ER, and thank you, Marlon. It's always such a joy and an honor to talk to you for a length of time, and I love you very much.
I love you too, RB. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. ER and Charis, thank you. Thank you as well.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
Good night, y'all.
This is beautiful.